to look at counterterrorism and national security laws and to try to make an assessment of what works and what doesn't work. And our view, based on that, is that counterterrorism laws, and this was our critique of the U.S. model, that react to terrorism by taking away human rights, have, in almost all cases, and I'll look at Iraq now, I'll look at Afghanistan, I think in all of these cases, have exacerbated the problem. In other words, you don't, by, say, committing torture in Iraq, the U.S. made the problem it was trying to resolve through a supposed counterterrorism strategy much, much worse. And that's not just at a moral level of undermining the value of the country, but in a practical military security level. So I think my point is that military security policy needs to take into account these issues of human rights. You strengthen that policy by taking those issues into account. One further example is where derogations of human rights are permissible. That is where you're allowed to, where a government can suspend or weaken its recognition of certain human rights. International law allows for this. So in other words, the idea is not that you must always respect all the rights regardless of the situation the country's in. If the country is facing a crisis, a national security crisis, you can adopt measures to address that crisis. In fact, it's the government's responsibility to its citizens to secure their safety to adopt measures for that crisis. But those measures have to be consistent with human rights and international law. So what that means is, for example, the government can't simply pass restrictions on free speech, assembly, rights of trial, or unless there is a declared state of emergency that is public, that is recognized, and certain rights, such as torture, can never be done away with. So this, I guess this is my answer to that question. On the research, the definitions of human rights, there are two sides to that. One is kind of legal definitions, which exist in international law. You have many different treaties. You have different bodies that have interpreted those laws. You have courts in countries that have interpreted international law. What is the right to be free from torture? What is, the right to health, et cetera, et cetera. But I think you were asking a different question, which the people's definition. I don't know that there has been a survey of the people's definition of human rights. Now, presumably, there is supposed to be a match between what is written in international law and what people think. But my view is actually international law in the abstract, there is a pretty good match. Because actually international law is very comprehensive. The problem is not as much in the laws, it's in the enforcement and implementation of the laws. So for example, when it comes to economic rights and poverty rights, which I think are foremost in people's minds, those are never implemented, enforced, talked about. Or not never, I shouldn't say that, but it's been rare, it's been relatively rare. And to the extent that I have been involved in, the groups I work with have been involved in surveys, popular surveys to ask them, what is important to you? The two things that are always important are, the first one is security. Security, especially in an insecure environment. We did a big survey in Afghanistan, and when people are afraid of violence in their communities, well, that's going to be a fundamental issue. In Latin America now, crime is so serious that it's become an immediate concern of people. The other is basic economic rights, survival, water, food, jobs, and I think in a crisis like now, development, measures to deal with poverty, extreme poverty, those are first and foremost on people's minds. And I think that you're right that to some extent freedom of expression may not be the most immediate thing to people, especially when there's a crisis. Now, this is a debate. This is there are also people who argue that freedom of expression is necessary in order to have an impact on poverty, so people can express the fact that we're really unhappy with what's going on, deal with our economic situation. But here is where I think there is a challenge from China. When you look at the America versus China model, especially in a crisis, an economic crisis, and here is where I think there was a failure at the origination of human rights. The model was too much my rights as an individual against the government, whereas there was an equally strong tradition within human rights that the government is also responsible for taking actions that address people's needs and human rights. This, I think, a little more is what we would call the Asian model, or what China would put forward as its contribution. So I think that contribution should be recognized in the human rights world, that public action, effective government is important. Effective government action to deal with poverty and hunger is part of the human rights model, as well as the right of people to have access to justice, courts, free speech. I think they're both important. The human rights world has neglected that government action side of things too much, or it's been seen as development separate. There have been moves within the UN to integrate these human development, and I think that we need more work on that. But I think that would be my response to your question.
No question. So I think we have have a very good discussion and very constructive. And thank you very much. I think you need to accept another round of applause. Thank you very much, Professor Emmerich and Sir Richard Joly and Dr. Roger Norman. And I would like to thank Jula Global Network for organizing this with us, and I want to thank Dr. Suragit Stirathai and the participants today for your time and your fruitful discussion. Thank you very much.